The boy with borrowed dream set was a small apartment in Chennai, tucked in the corner of a crowded lane that always smelled faintly of spices and heat. Everything about that place was modest. The peeling paint, the rusted window grills, the worn doormat that had once been bright red but had now faded into a dull brown. But inside there was a kind of warmth. Not because of wealth or comfort, but because of something deeper. Love, yes. And silence. The kind of silence that only poor families learn to live with. A silence filled with hope, sacrifice, and the sound of people pretending not to want too much. Sundar was 12 when he first noticed the broken fan in their living room. It had never worked, not properly. It made a groaning sound, almost like a tired old man breathing heavily. Still, it spun slowly, and in summer, that was enough. They never had the money to fix it, but his mother would wipe it down every week, like it was something precious. That fan had seen everything. Birthday cakes made from biscuits, exam results that ended in tears, and quiet evenings where the family sat together without speaking, just existing beside each other, waiting for something to change. His father worked as an electrical engineer, but the kind that didn't get paid much. His job wasn't glamorous, and his paycheck was thinner than a loaf of bread. Still, he came home every evening with a calm face, washed his hands in the kitchen sink, and asked Sundar about school. Always about school. Education was the only thing they believed could break the chain, the invisible weight that held their family close to the ground. His mother never complained. She just folded old saris into neat squares and told him stories of gods and kings. Stories where small people rose up and did big things. Stories that planted dreams in his heart. But Sundar's world wasn't made for dreams. Not yet. He didn't have a phone. They didn't own a car. They didn't even have a television until much later, and even then, it had bad sound and bad picture. He studied under dim yellow lights, often during power cuts, with a candle flickering beside his notebooks. He shared everything, clothes, space, privacy, with his younger brother. And yet, he never complained either. Maybe he knew. Maybe even then he could feel that the weight of struggle was shaping him into something strong. School was a battlefield. Not because he hated learning, but because he was shy. He knew answers, but rarely spoke. He would sit in the third row, not too far in front, not too far behind, just enough to disappear. But teachers noticed him. His math teacher once told his father, "This boy sees patterns where others see problems." That sentence stayed with Sundar. It made him believe there was something special about the way his mind worked. He started loving numbers. He would solve puzzles in a newspaper with a kind of hunger that frightened his mother. Sometimes he skipped meals to finish equations. Sometimes he would stare out the window at the city buses and wonder how they were tracked, how the routes were optimized, how information moved. Years later, that same obsession with information would lead him to the doors of Google. But back then, he was just a boy with questions and no internet. Then came the scholarship. A miracle, really, I'd Karagar. It was the kind of news that made his mother cry silently while making chapatis. The kind of news that made his father sit down and close his eyes, overwhelmed. They didn't have money for the train ticket, but somehow they managed. Neighbors pitched in. His mother sold a gold bangle, the only one she owned. When Sundar boarded the train, he had one suitcase, one set of formal clothes, and a steel tiffin box filled with curd rice. But his heart? It was filled with something. Rare. Belief. Not pride. Belief. I too was a different world. Boys with laptops, with fancy sneakers, with stories of foreign travel. Sundar felt out of place. His English was bookish. His accent was thick. His shirts were always too big or too plain. But inside the classroom, he transformed. He wasn't loud, but he was sharp. Professors began to notice. Students started asking him for help. And slowly, he began to stand a little taller. Not because he had changed, but because he had begun to realize he didn't have to die was during his second year that he saw her. Anjali. She was standing outside the library, arguing with someone about a programming problem. Her voice was clear, confident. Her eyes didn't flinch. She wasn't the kind of girl Sundar usually spoke to. She was fearless and he was careful, but something about her pulled him in. Not her looks, though she was beautiful. It was the way she thought. Her brain moved fast and her heart didn't hide behind walls. Their first conversation wasn't magical. It was awkward. Sundar stumbled over his words and she laughed, not cruelly, but kindly, like someone opening a door. After that, they met often, always near the mess hall or on the way to class. They talked about code, books, childhood memories. She came from a family slightly better off, but she never made him feel small. In fact, she made him feel seen. One evening, under a neem tree on campus. He told her about the broken fan, about the candlelit nights, about his mother's bangle. He didn't mean to. The words just slipped out. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "One day, you'll give her a house where every fan works perfectly." Sundar looked at her, surprised. No one had ever spoken to him like that, like his future was certain, not just possible. He didn't know it then, but that sentence would become a promise. The years passed. He graduated with honors, top of his class. He got an offer from Stanford. The tuition was more than his father had earned in 5 years. They couldn't afford it, but again, a scholarship saved him. Sundar left for the US with 2 shirts, 1 pair of shoes, and a heart that was both terrified and alive. He promised Anjali he would stay in touch. She smiled and said, "I'll wait." They didn't hug. They didn't cry. It was just a quiet moment of 2 people holding on to something invisible and strong. America was cold, not just the weather, but the people, the silence, the way everything felt big and fast and loud. Sundar missed home. He missed curd rice. He missed the smell of rain on dust. And most of all, he missed her. Letters were slow, calls were expensive. But they wrote anyway. Long, thoughtful letters filled with dreams, doubts, tiny victories. She once sent him a hand-drawn diagram explaining a coding trick. He kept it in his wallet for months. Stanford changed him. Not his heart, but his possibilities. He saw how technology moved the world. He began to dream not just of survival, but of influence. Of shaping how people lived, how they searched, how they connected. He wanted to build, not just earn. He joined Google in 2004, a quiet recruit with a serious face and simple clothes. On his first day, he got lost in the office. But within weeks, people noticed his clarity. He didn't talk much, but when he did, others listened. His mind worked like a clean river, deep, quiet, unstoppable. But success wasn't easy. It never is. There were late nights, lost projects, misunderstandings. There were moments where he felt like giving up. Moments where he doubted if he truly belonged in a room filled with Ivy League accents and expensive suits. One night, after a particularly hard day, he sat alone in his apartment, staring at the lights of San Francisco. He was surrounded by success, but felt deeply alone. He thought of calling home, but it was too late in India. Then he found her letter. He hadn't read it in weeks. He opened it. Inside was one line, "You're not alone. Not now, not ever." He picked up his phone and dialed her number, unsure if she'd still pick up after so long. The line rang once, twice, then her voice, sleepy, familiar, warm. "Hello?" And just like that, the silence broke. Asterisk, the long-distance hearth. Night Sundar heard her voice again after so many months. Something inside him softened. All the stress from meetings, the pressure to prove himself in a world that didn't speak like him or dress like him, the loneliness of cold dinners eaten in silence, all of it faded. She didn't say anything profound, just his name. Just, "Sundar, is that you?" And he knew. He knew that no matter how far he had come or how lost he sometimes felt, one voice could bring him back. They talked for almost an hour. About nothing, really. About her job, about his long work hours, about the smell of coffee in the Google cafeteria. They laughed about old college memories, like the time he wore mismatched socks to a presentation. It was simple, but something About that conversation filled him with a kind of peace he hadn't felt in months. But peace is fragile in a life that's always moving. At Google, Sundar was starting to gain attention, not because he was loud, but because he asked the right questions. He didn't just follow instructions. He wanted to understand how things worked and why people use certain products in the first place. One day, in a meeting where most people were discussing data speeds in backend systems, Sundar asked, "What if the user just wants something simple, something that works every time?" The room went quiet. It wasn't a technical insight. It was a human one. His team was assigned to work on the toolbar. It wasn't the most glamorous project. In fact, some people saw it as a dead-end assignment. Toolbar was functional, but not flashy. It helped users search directly from their browser. Simple, not revolutionary. But Sundar didn't see it that way. He saw it as a doorway. He realized something crucial that once people started using Google search from their toolbar, they stopped using other search engines. It became a habit. Invisible, quiet, but powerful. Asterisk. While others were chasing new technologies, he focused on user habits, what people liked, what they hated. He started learning from them, not just coding for them. Slowly, the data began to speak. Toolbar usage grew. Google search became not just a product. It became part of people's lives. And Sundar had helped make that happen. But back home in India, life wasn't standing still. Anjali had started working as an engineer. She had job offers from companies that paid well. Her parents wanted her to settle down. There were conversations she didn't want to have about marriage, about tradition, about timelines. Everyone around her had expectations. And she was tired of saying, "I'm waiting for someone." Some relatives even said it gently, as if it was concern. "You're a smart girl," they'd whisper. "Don't waste your best years waiting for a boy who's chasing dreams across the ocean." But Anjali wasn't waiting like someone who had nothing better to do. She was building her own life. She just happened to believe in a man who wasn't rich yet, who didn't own a car or a house, but whose heart she trusted more than any bank account. Sometimes Sundar would call and she'd be too tired to talk. Other times she'd call and he'd be in a late night meeting. Time zones didn't forgive lovers, but they tried. Sometimes just one message was enough to keep the connection alive. One photo, one voice note, one memory. On weekends, Sundar would walk through the streets of Palo Alto, passing cafes full of laughter and light, feeling like an outsider. He didn't drink coffee the way others did. He didn't laugh loudly in groups. He saved every extra dollar. He still took the bus when others drove. But he walked with purpose. He was building something no one could see yet. And through it all, there was her. Always her. The memory of their talks, her handwritten letters, the way she once told him, "I don't need you to be successful. I just need you to stay kind." One winter night, he got a call. Her voice was tight, like she was holding something back. She said, "There's a proposal. My parents want me to consider it. Someone from Hyderabad. Nice family. Good job." They're serious. The silence after that felt endless. Sundar's throat went dry. He didn't know what to say. He didn't blame her. She had waited, but the world doesn't wait forever. Finally, he said quietly, "Do you want to meet him?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked, "Do you want me to keep waiting?" His answer was not dramatic. He simply said, "Yes." She laughed softly, almost sadly. "Then, promise me one thing. When you're ready, you won't hesitate." That call changed something in him. It made the future feel urgent. He started saving more. He ate less, worked more. He took on extra responsibilities. He joined every meeting he could. Not to impress, but to learn. He watched how leaders spoke, how they handled conflict, how they made decisions that affected millions. And inside him, something was growing, not just him, but clarity. He wasn't chasing money. He was building value. He wasn't trying to be seen. He was trying to make things that mattered. Google noticed. His work on Toolbar led to new assignments. Chrome was next. The browser no one thought was needed. Internet Explorer ruled the space. Firefox was rising. Google didn't even have a browser yet. But Sundar believed that a fast, secure, clean browser could change how people used the web. Others were skeptical, but he pushed. Quietly, consistently. He formed a team, small, focused, obsessed with performance. They built Chrome from scratch. Every feature was thought through. Speed, simplicity, safety. They didn't just want people to use it. They wanted people to love it. During this time, Sundar visited India for the first time in years. The flight was long, but his heartbeat was louder than the engine noise. He carried a simple ring in his coat pocket, no diamonds. Just a circle of promise. When he met Anjali again, it was on a rainy afternoon. They went to their old campus, walked under the same neem tree. He held her hand, looked into her eyes, and said, "Will you come with me? Not for a vacation, not for a few months, forever." She didn't cry. She just smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." They didn't have a grand wedding, just a small ceremony. Close family, close friends, no stage lights, no designer clothes. But the joy in that room was something money can't buy. It was the joy of two people who had waited, believed, grown, together and apart, and had finally found their way back. After marriage, they moved to the US together. The apartment was small but bright. They'd bought secondhand furniture. She cooked, he cleaned. They fought sometimes about groceries, bills, late hours. But every night they found a way to come back to each other. Chrome launched in 2008. People were curious. And then they were impressed. The speed, the ease, the design. It was different. Within a year, it became a hit. Within 3 years, it became the most used browser in the world. In Sundar, he was no longer invisible. He started being invited to big rooms. Rooms where decisions shaped the future of the internet. He was still quiet, still modest. But now people leaned in when he spoke, because what he said made sense. Because he saw what others missed. Still, even with the rising success, he kept things simple. He drove a modest car, wore basic clothes, lived like the boy who once studied under candlelight, because he hadn't forgotten. Because she hadn't. Let him forget. One evening, while returning from a conference, he opened the door to find her asleep on the couch, a book resting on her stomach. Her phone screen still lit up, a photo of their college days. He watched her, quietly, grateful. And for the first time in months, he felt still, but life, as always, was about to test him again. The next morning, he received an internal email, confidential. Google was reorganizing. Leadership roles were shifting. And someone had whispered his name for the biggest leap of all. Asterisk. The quiet climb the email sat in his inbox, like a ticking clock. Short, formal, and yet it held the weight of something that could change everything. Sundar stared at it for a while before opening it. Like a man standing at the edge of a door he wasn't sure he was ready to walk through. The message wasn't dramatic. It simply read that there would be a confidential leadership evaluation. His name had been recommended. He was to attend a meeting the following Monday. The tone was cold, almost indifferent. But Sundar knew what it meant. It meant someone at the top had noticed him. Someone had said, "This guy, maybe he's ready." He closed his laptop slowly, breathing out through his nose. He didn't smile. He didn't tell Anjali right away. Instead, he walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and stared out the window at the evening sky. Clouds moved like old memories, slow, uncertain. He thought about his first day at Google, how he'd gotten lost in the hallway, how his badge had hung awkwardly on his neck. Now they were asking if he wanted a seat at the table. Not just any table, the table. The one where decisions were made, where futures were drawn. Anjali noticed something in his silence. She always did. She walked over, touched his shoulder, lightly, and said, "That day?" He shook his head. "No, strange day." And then he told her everything, the email, the meeting, what it might mean. She didn't gasp or scream. She simply smiled, leaned in, and whispered about time. But Sundar wasn't celebrating. Not yet. He knew what this meant. It meant scrutiny. It meant politics. It meant stepping out of the quiet corner where he had always worked so well and into the spotlight, where expectations were loud and failures echoed longer. He wasn't afraid of hard work. He never had been, but visibility, that was different. He had spent most of his life being the one who blended in, who listened more than he spoke, who let his work speak instead of his voice. Still, he showed up on Monday, dressed as always, plain shirt, neat trousers, simple shoes. No watch. No fancy pen, just clarity. The room was filled with faces he knew only from internal memos and town hall meetings. Big names. Powerful voices. He wasn't sure if he belonged there. But then someone asked a question about product integration across platforms. People threw around buzzwords, complex terms. Sundar sat quietly, listening. Then he leaned forward and said, "Maybe we're thinking of features, but the user doesn't care about features. The user cares about trust. Does it work? Does it protect them? Is it easy?" There was a pause. Someone at the table nodded slowly. Then someone else asked him a follow-up question. And just like that, Sundar found his rhythm. Not by trying to impress, but by being honest. By thinking like the boy from Chennai who always asked why that meeting opened a door. It didn't swing wide open. Just a crack. But sometimes that's all you need. Over the next few months, he was given more responsibilities. Chrome, Android, Gmail, Google Drive. He wasn't just managing teams anymore. He was shaping ecosystems. And with every project he led, he brought the same philosophy: simplicity, speed, and service. He believed technology should be invisible, not loud, not flashy, just useful. At home, things changed too. Not in a dramatic way. They still lived modestly, still cooked together, still argued over grocery lists. But now there were more late nights, more trips, more pressure. Anjali watched him closely. She never complained. But one night, while folding laundry, she said, "Just promise me one thing. When you rise, don't lose your calm." Sundar smiled. "What if I fall?" She looked up. "Then don't lose your kindness." It wasn't a fairy tale rise. There were failures. Product launches that didn't land. Ideas that looked good on paper but fell apart in execution. There were disagreements with colleagues. Moments of doubt. Times when even he questioned whether he was the right person for this level of leadership. And then something happened that shook the company to its core. A major executive left unexpectedly. It was all over the news. Headlines, blogs, speculation. The structure at the top was shifting. Suddenly there was space and tension. Everyone was watching. Who would fill the void? Who could lead not just a product, but a vision? Internally, names were whispered. Loud ones, obvious ones. But one name kept surfacing. Not from those who shouted the loudest, but from those who mattered quietly. Sundar. The decision wasn't immediate. There were weeks of evaluation, interviews, debates. Then one morning, as he was about to step into a meeting, his phone buzzed. A senior executive was calling. The voice on the other end was calm, formal. "Sundar, the board is ready to offer you the role. We want you to lead product across all platforms." He didn't speak for a moment. The world didn't spin. It paused. After the call, he sat in silence for a long time. He thought about his father, about the broken fan, about the dusty bookshelves. He thought about his mother, carefully wrapping chapatis in cloth napkins. He thought about the neem tree, about Anjali's eyes when she said, "I'll wait." He called her next. She didn't answer. He waited. She called back a minute later, slightly breathless. "Everything okay?" He said one word. "Yes." Then added, "They want me to lead everything." Her voice broke into a soft laugh. "Of course they do." They didn't go out to celebrate. They didn't buy a new car. Instead, they made chai, sat on the balcony, and watched the sky change color. But the world outside was changing fast. With great power came great attention. Sundar's name was now in headlines. Journalists, wrote profiles. People debated his leadership style. Some said he was too soft. Others called him the future. But he didn't chase approval. He chased clarity. His schedule grew tighter. His responsibilities heavier. He was no longer just managing teams. He was shaping the direction of the entire company. Google was not just a search engine anymore. It was becoming a force, one that touched billions of lives every day. And Sundar was steering that ship. One evening, during a flight back from a product summit, he opened his laptop and saw a news article with his picture. The headline read, "The soft-spoken Indian behind Google's bold future." He read it once, then again, then closed the screen. He didn't feel powerful. He felt responsible. Back home, Anjali greeted him with a tired smile. "Long flight?" He nodded. "Long week." She poured him a cup of tea. They sat in silence for a while. Then she said, "So, what's next?" He looked at her and said, "I don't know. But it's going to be big." And it was a few weeks later, there were whispers of an even bigger change. Google was restructuring. Alphabet Inc. was being formed, a new parent company. And the CEO role for Google was going to open up. No one said anything directly to Sundar. Not at first, but he could feel the shift. More meetings, more questions, more eyes. And then one day, in a private room, the offer was made. CEO of Google. Asterisk. The weight of the crown. It was early morning when the offer came. The kind of morning that felt too still to carry such a heavy decision. Sundar had barely slept the night before. He had tossed and turned, the thought circling his mind like a restless bird. It wasn't the offer itself that unsettled him. It was everything that came with it. The title was powerful. 3 letters that changed how people looked at you. CEO. But Sundar had never been drawn to power. He was drawn to purpose. The meeting was short, professional, no big speeches. Just a few sentences spoken across a long, polished table. "We believe you're the right person to lead Google," one executive said. "You've earned the respect of the teams, the board, and the world. The question now is, are you ready?" Ready. That word rang in his ears. He walked out of the room and stepped into a hallway filled with quiet footsteps and distant voices. Everything felt ordinary and unreal at the same time. He took the elevator down alone. The numbers blinked softly. 22, 19, 12, 5, ground. And all the way down, his thoughts were about success. They were about responsibility. He called Anjali. She answered on the first ring. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. She knew. Her voice was soft. "It's happening, isn't it?" He whispered. "They offered it." And she asked. I said yes. There was silence. Not shock. Not surprise. Just silence filled with quiet understanding. That night, they didn't celebrate. They sat together, close, their fingers interlocked. Sundar rested his head on her shoulder. She ran her hand through his hair slowly, as if anchoring him to the life they had built. The life before the title, before the lights, before the world knew his name. And that's what Sundar carried into his first day as CEO. Not ego, but memory. But the world outside didn't care for memory. It only cared for results. From the moment the news broke, things changed. His name was everywhere. Newspapers, websites, podcasts. Sundar Pichai, the new CEO of Google. Journalists scrambled to write his story. From Chennai to Silicon Valley, they wrote, "The rise of a quiet genius." Some articles were glowing. Others questioned if he was too soft for a world. That demanded bold moves. The internet, as always, had opinions. At work, he noticed the difference immediately. People started standing straighter when he entered a room. Voices dropped when he walked by. Junior engineers looked at him with awe. Some avoided eye contact altogether. Meetings became more formal. Colleagues who used to joke with him now watched. Their words, he hated it, not because he wanted to be liked, but because he wanted to be real. And yet, he knew. He knew that leadership came with distance. People saw the role before they saw the person. And so he made a quiet promise to himself to never forget the boy who studied by candlelight. The boy who shared a room, who borrowed books, who walked barefoot through dusty roads to school. That boy was still here. And he was the reason Sundar was who he had become. But leading Google wasn't just about keeping promises to himself. It was about steering a giant. Google was no longer just a company. It was a force that shaped how billions of people lived, learned, and connected. Every product decision, every policy change, every line of code, it all mattered on a scale most people couldn't even imagine. The pressure was immense. Some nights, Sundar would sit in his office long after everyone had left, staring at the dashboard of global activity. Numbers spinning, graphs rising, maps lighting up. Every blip meant a person. Every click, a story. But with power came storms. The first came just months into his role. A privacy scandal involving data collection. News broke fast. Critics were loud. Users were scared. Politicians raised questions. Reporters demanded answers. For the first time, Sundar faced the world not as an engineer, but as the voice of a global giant. He was called to testify before Congress. The headline screamed, Google CEO to face lawmakers. On the morning of the hearing, he wore a plain suit, combed his hair carefully, and kissed Anjali's forehead before leaving. She looked at him and said, just speak the truth. He sat before a panel of powerful people, cameras everywhere, microphones too close. Questions came like bullets, sharp, fast, often hostile. Some were technical. Others were theatrical. A congressman asked, if I walk to the other side of the room and sit down, will Google know? Sundar blinked, confused. No, not by default. The room laughed, but Sundar didn't. He stayed calm, patient, respectful. He explained how algorithms worked, how data was used, how Google protected user trust. He didn't deflect. He didn't dodge. He simply answered. When the hearing ended, he walked out quietly. No grand statements, no victory laps, just the soft relief of having spoken his truth. That night, back home, Anjali was waiting with dinner. Dal, rice, warm chapatis. Comfort food. He sat down, exhausted. She looked at him and said, you did well. He smiled. They laughed at one of the questions. She raised her eyebrows. Did you laugh back? He shook his head. No, just answered. She nodded. That's why they gave you the job. In the weeks that followed, public trust began to return. Not all at once, but slowly. Because people had seen the man behind the machine. And he had been humble, clear, and honest. But the challenges didn't stop. Every month brought something new. Internal protests, product controversies, rising competition, regulatory pressure. Sundar's days became longer. His inbox overflowed. He learned to make decisions with incomplete information, to say no when it hurt, to defend his team when critics circled like sharks. But he also learned something deeper, that leadership was not about always being right. It was about listening, learning, and staying steady when the ground shifted. Asterisk one weekend. After a particularly hard week, Sundar and Anjali drove out to a quiet trail on the coast. They hiked in silence. The ocean roared beside them. At the top of the cliff, they sat on a rock and watched the waves crash below. He turned to her and asked, do you ever miss the old days? She looked at him for a long time, then said, I miss your sleep. You used to sleep better when we had nothing. He laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was true. She added, but I don't miss worrying if we'll make rent. They sat there, letting the wind speak. As the sun began to set, she reached into her bag and handed him something. An old photo. It was a picture of them back in college. Him in oversized clothes. Her in a simple kurta. Both of them under the neem tree, smiling like they had the world in front of them. He stared at it. We look like kids. We were, she said, but we were brave. He folded the photo and placed it in his wallet, where he used to keep her letters. Maybe he needed the reminder. Maybe we all do. Because success can be loud, but memory whispers. In Sundar Pichai, the boy who once studied by candlelight, was now carrying the light for billions. But just when things began to feel Steady again. A quiet storm started brewing behind the scenes. A decision had to be made. One that could shake the foundation of the company, test public trust again, and define his legacy forever. Asterisk the storm within fear was a silence in the Google offices that week. Not the silence of peace, but the silence that comes before a storm. People spoke in hushed voices. Hallways that once buzzed with casual jokes and brainstorms now echoed with tension. Something big was happening, and at the center of it was Sundar. The problem wasn't one thing. It was 1,000 tiny sparks that threatened to become a fire. Internally, there was unrest. Employees had begun to question the company's involvement in certain government projects. A leaked memo revealed that Google was considering developing surveillance tools using artificial intelligence. The news hit the public like a punch to the chest. It made headlines. It made people angry. And for Sundar, it brought something even more personal: doubt. Not technical doubt, not business doubt. Moral doubt. For the first time since becoming CEO, he felt a fracture between what the company was capable of doing and what it should be doing. This wasn't about code. This was about conscience. He stayed late in his office that night, long after most of the lights had gone off. Outside, the San Francisco skyline blinked like a city trying to stay awake. Inside, he sat with the memo on his desk, reading every line again. He tried to remember the first time he ever touched a computer. It was at a black screen, blinking cursor. Back then, computers were a symbol of promise. Now, they had become a question mark. NJAL, I called. Around 10, her voice was soft. Are you coming home? He didn't answer right away. Ben said, soon. She paused. Don't lose sleep over this. He didn't respond. Some nights, words don't help. The next morning, Sundar met with the leadership team. The room was tense. Some argued for innovation. Others argued for caution. People threw around phrases like competitive edge and strategic advantage. But Sundar sat quietly for a long time. When he finally spoke, it wasn't a grand speech. Just a question. If our users stop trusting us, what's left? No one had an answer. He knew then that this wasn't just a product decision. It was a turning point. In the days that followed, he met with engineers, legal teams, ethicists, and even external advisors. He walked through open offices and listened to employees who had once idolized him and now looked at him with guarded eyes. Some said, we joined this company to build helpful tools, not weapons. Others said, we trust you to make the right call. He carried those words home. At night, Anjali would sit across from him at the dinner table, watching him pick at his food, lost in thought. She didn't push. She never had. But one evening, she said gently, you're trying to fix everything. But maybe you just need to choose who you are. And that hit him harder than any headline, because that was the real question, wasn't it? Who was he now? Was he still the boy who solved puzzles by candlelight? The man who chose clarity over noise? The leader who believed in simplicity and trust? Or had the machine changed him? That weekend, he drove alone to the coast. No meetings, no assistants, just the ocean and his own reflection. He walked along the rocky path, letting the wind hit his face. He thought about his father, how he used to come home quietly, never complaining, how he once said, do the right thing, even if no one sees it. On Monday, Sundar called an all-hands meeting. Thousands of employees streamed across offices worldwide. The stage was plain, no slides, no graphics. Just him. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the crowd. Then he said, I've always believed that technology should serve people, not control them. He talked about the leak project, the truth, the concerns. He didn't deny it. He didn't spin it. Instead, he said something few expected. We will not pursue this project. Not because it's illegal, but because it's not aligned with who we are and who we need to be. The room was quiet. Then, slowly, applause began to build, not wild, not forced. It's real. Outside that room, critics had mixed reactions. Some said it was a weak move. Others called it brave. But inside Google, something shifted. People felt heard, respected, seen. And Sundar, He didn't feel victorious. He felt tired. That night, he came home and found Anjali sitting on the couch, a cup of tea in her hand. She looked up, saw his face, and simply opened her arms. He walked into them and rested his head on her shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "I'm not sure what I did," he replied. "You chose," she said. And that's leadership. But even as the storm settled, another door opened. One that would challenge him in ways even he didn't expect. Alphabet. The parent company was preparing for another shift. Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the original founders, were stepping down from their executive roles. And the board was considering who should lead not just Google. But everything got the call came late, after dinner. A voice on the line said, "We want you to take over as CEO of Alphabet." Sundar sat very still. Outside. The night was quiet. Inside. His heart began to race. Asterisk the light he carried. The room was silent after the call ended. Sundar set his phone down on the dining table and just stared at it, the screen slowly dimming to black. It was not shock that washed over him, not excitement, not even fear. It was something quieter, deeper, the heavy stillness that comes when you realize your life has just changed again, and there's no going back. Alphabet, not just Google, not just products or platforms or features, but the entire vision. The parent of it all, he had been asked to lead the whole architecture of the modern digital world. The man who once solved math problems under a dim bulb was now standing at the edge of something almost unreal. And all he could think about was how to tell his mother. Anjali walked in, holding a glass of warm water. She paused when she saw his face. "What happened?" she asked, already knowing. "They want me to take over," he said quietly. "All of it." She didn't blink, didn't gasp. She just walked over, placed the glass in front of him, and said, "So you're going to need more tea." He let out a breath that turned into a soft laugh, and in that laugh was a lifetime of small beginnings, hard nights, quiet triumphs, and the love of someone who never needed him to be famous to believe he was extraordinary. But the days that followed were anything but quiet. The announcement went public, and the world, once again, turned to look at him. From Chennai streets to Silicon Valley's highest chair, the headlines read, "Sundar Pichai now rules Google's kingdom. Humble genius leads the world's most powerful tech empire." But Sundar didn't see a crown. He saw a burden, his inbox flooded with messages. Congratulations from world leaders, CEOs, professors, journalists. Old classmates wrote to him, some with nostalgia, some with envy. News outlets told stories of his childhood, of his college days, of his long-distance love, and every version of the story focused on his rise, on the glow of success. But what none of them saw was what it really cost. The nights spent in empty hotel rooms, eating alone, far from his children. The birthdays missed. The quiet stress that crept into his shoulders and stayed there. The doubt that never fully disappeared, no matter how high he climbed. But still, he moved forward, because to him leadership was not about titles. It was about holding the mirror, making sure that every decision, every step, every tool built under his watch reflected the values he refused to abandon: simplicity, humility, and respect. Asterisk the company evolved under him. Artificial intelligence began reshaping the way people lived. Conversations turned into commands. Phones became assistants. Predictions replaced reactions. And yet, through all the marvels, Sundar kept repeating one phrase to his teams: build for the people who don't speak the loudest. He would walk into meetings and ask, how does this help the school teacher in a village with slow internet? He would challenge engineers. Would my father be able to use this without help? And when debates grew too focused on money or metrics, he'd ask, what would the 12-year-old version of me think of this? Those questions changed everything. Not instantly, not always easily. But gradually they became part of the culture. He didn't want Google to be the biggest. He wanted it to be the kindest. Asterisk and Anjali. She stayed beside him through it all. Never in the spotlight. Never seeking credit. She raised their children with grace and strength, while he carried the weight of decisions that shaped the world. They made time for each other in small ways: a morning walk before sunrise, handwritten notes tucked into suitcases, shared playlists on flights. Their love was not loud. It was patient, and that made it unbreakable. Asterisk,